sometimes it can be a little bit hard to get your models from Blender 3D to print out in the right size. This is usually just due to a little confusion about scales in Blender. Most of that is due to the fact that Blender uses its own units of measurement, the Blender unit. This is completely an arbitrary unit, and we can use it however we want. There is a very good reason for it, and let me try to explain in the way that I usually do with students. For instance, look at this sphere here in the screen. It could be anything we want. It can be a molecule, but it could be a representation of a planet or a galaxy. We can make it any size we like. And let's say that we measure in a specific unit. Let's say we make Blender, for instance, measure in meters. So meter 1 is 1 meter. That's what the standard would be. That would be logical to a lot of people. Then let's say this is a sphere. It's a very tiny sphere. It is 1 nanometer across. So it's very, very tiny, and we're making it in Blender. Then in Blender units, its radius would be 0.0001. This is a lot of numbers. It's a very small scale, but it's actually using 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros and a 1. That's how many meters we're using, but it's actually 10 digits. So every time you're calculating something in meters that's that small, you need at least those 10 digits. And that takes a lot of processing power, right? Say that we were making a galaxy or something and you measure in light years. So this would be 1 light year radius. A light year is actually this many meters. That's even more numbers. So if we were calculating stuff in light years, doing things as big as light years and measuring it in meters, it would make our computer very slow. Instead, if we just say, you know what, we're going to make our 1 in Blender 1 light year, and all we need is, we're making it twice as big, that's 1 times 2, that's just very few numbers we need for the math. This is why Blender is lightning fast, because we make our scale relative to what we want to do. That said, what we usually want to do for 3D printing is working in meters or millimeters. And if we want to do that, we can go to the scene settings and change the units of measurement. I will go here to this little guy. This is blue. You might have seen him before. Currently he is 7.5 Blender units tall. That can be for some programs, if you export like this, that would become 7.5 meters. Though if we export and give it to some other people, they might make it 7.5 millimeters. We have to decide what we want to use. For me, usually I like to measure in millimeters. So what I will do is enable the metric scale, and you can see it's made it's made blue 7.5 meters tall. 7.5 meters, well, not many printers can do 7.5 meters right now. It's usually closer to millimeters or centimeters what we're printing. So I will make it millimeters, which is the other standard. To make a meter into a millimeter, I need 0.001 as a scale. And you can see now blue is 7.5 millimeters tall. So let's say I do want him 7.5 centimeters tall. All I have to do is scale him 10 times. So I've scaled him 10 times. He is 7.5 centimeters tall. I will apply the scale. If I now export my file and I tell the 3D printer to use 1 Blender unit as 1 millimeter, I can print at 7.5 centimeters tall. This is how to set up your units. Most of the time, very simple. Use the metric measurement. Leave it at 1 if you want to measure in meters. Put it at 0.001 if you want to measure in millimeters. And tell your 3D printer, whether you have a device or you're using a service, which of the two that you've been using. now that we've set up our units in this file, this is a good moment to go and measure something, for which we have a brand new tool in Blender 3D. It is called the ruler/protractor. It's impossible for me to say as a Dutchman. To make it a little bit easier to see how it works, I will disable the subsurface modifier here. That way our model is less detailed. And at the bottom of the Object Tools shelf, you can find the ruler. Once you click it, you are in the ruler. You can see all the options at the bottom of the 3D view. And the way to add a first new ruler is just click and drag with your mouse. You can see I made a ruler that is 10.55 centimeters long. Of course, you want to measure real things. I can drag it to somewhere on my model and I know, well, this is about 2.7 centimeters from one end to the other. If I want to be really precise, I can drag whilst holding shift. If you hold shift, control I mean, if I hold control, you can see it's snapping to the nearest item, either a face or a vertex. It will snap. So I know the point of this foot, and I'll drag that one with control as well. To that is 3.9 centimeters. If you want to know how thick something is, which is really useful for 3D print stuff, because for instance a neck could break if it's too thin for your 3D print, I can take this end and drag it whilst holding shift. If you do that, it measures, we'll look a little bit closer, from the middle of the face where you are along the direction it's looking in to see the other end. So we'll hold down shift and I'll find a nice one. Let's turn this back on. See, I can't do anything here now because I'm still in the ruler. I'm working with the ruler. I can either hit enter to store my ruler or escape to get rid of it. I will hit enter, enable my subsurface again and go back to the ruler protector. It is, remember this, so I will move it and hold shift so I can measure the thickness, and you can see it's measuring along the normal. It's a pretty good measurement. So the neck is about 7.14 millimeters across. For a 3D print, that is absolutely fine. Usually you have to be at least over 3 to be completely safe. This won't break. I can print it in any material on any printer. That is the new ruler in Blender. One more feature it has, you can click in the middle of an existing ruler and measure angles as well. It is really neat. It is brand new. I'm sure it's going to be developed more soon and we're all going to have a lot of uses for it. Since we're talking about measurements and setting up units, I think the thing I have to mention is object scale. You see all the points in our 3D models. For instance, I will take the very top point, has its own location. In this case, this is 0. If you see this weird behind it, that means it's so tiny we can't really measure it, so I'll just make it 0. That's a lot clearer. It is 0 by 0 by 7.5 centimeters. Now if I go into object mode and I scale the entire object to be a bit bigger and then go into edit mode, you see this value, it is still at the same height even though I scaled the object up. That is because everything is multiplied by this value in the end. So even though something can be at point number 1, right, it's only 1 up from 0. If the object scale is 10, it will be placed 1 times 10 is 10 up from 0. Scale is really handy because you can modify the entire object. Otherwise we would have to take all the points and scale them all together all the time. It's much easier to take the object in object mode and manipulate the object. But here's the thing, Not every program does this, and not every export format likes it. Not everybody uses object scale. A lot of programs just want to know where a point is in space. So what we have to do before we export, pretty much use it as a rule, apply your scale before you export. You can do that here, object, apply, scale. If we do this, I will do it, the scale is 1 by 1 by 1. If I now go into edit mode, it has been applied, and the Z value, it's now 9 up, no longer 7.5. So, and if we multiply the blender 1 times that, it is absolutely clear that point should be 9 up from 0. It doesn't matter what program we're in. That's pretty much object scale. Keep an eye on it. Just apply before you export is a really good rule to live by. Whilst we're talking about units and measurements, I'd also like to show you some brand new and very useful statistics that we've added to Blender, and they are part of a new 3D print add-on. If you don't have it yet, go have a look under File and User Preferences. This should be in Blender 2.67 or later. We're in the User Preferences, go to the tab that says Add-ons at the top. Enable all of the support levels, that way we can search through everything, and we just say print, and we should have a mesh 3D print toolbox. Make sure you've got it checked behind them, that enables it, and if it's enabled, save user settings and close this up. Now there should be a new panel under the Object Tools, so at the top it says Object Tools. I can collapse it, and there's a Print 3D panel. It has lots of useful functions that we'll look at when we're fixing models, because that's where it's most useful. But because we're measuring, I'd like to show you the volume statistic. You can click on volume and it calculates how many cubic items or units your object is. Because we've set this file up to work in millimeters, it tells it very neatly it is 21 cubic centimeters, this model. And if we're paying by the cubic centimeters, this is a very useful bit of information. Just like the volume, we can also get the surface area. Click on area, and at the bottom it tells me it is 62.99 square centimeters in surface area. These are always relative to what we're measuring in, and it's incredibly useful, I have to say. It's one of my favorite new features in this version of Blender.